Hello, BookTube. As you can tell from the title of this video, we're going to be talking about Vermont, but not, as you might have thought from the title of the video, Reading, Vermont, a sleepy little hamlet of 650 people in Windsor County. Instead, we're going to be going further south and talking about a different place in Vermont, and referring to the fact that months ago, when I was visiting, Frida and I were visiting the little old farmhouse up in Vermont, visit Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads and his family. We went used book hunting, as one does. And I amassed a huge number of books. I did a haul of these books when I was up there. And when I brought them back here to Hyde Cottage, I did not deal with them. There was a gigantic 5-foot-tall stack of books. I made them into a couple of stacks. I woodged the stacks together, and I shoved them against the foot of a bookcase, rather than inventory them and then disperse them to wherever they belong. Oh, have I got a little activity? I do. There's a little activity. Oh. And my thinking when I did that, when I left, I don't usually do that. I don't like to have, as far as I'm concerned, having piles of books on the floor is a sign of defeat as a book owner. That is when you know that you've gone too far, unless it's a pile of books that you're building on the floor in order to sell. I regularly have one of those going. But if you're storing books, if books are just piling up on the floor, I always view that as a mark of defeat, that I am not controlling my book collection well enough. Sorry about the weird lighting here. I know you're thinking that it's a gray, cold, miserable midwinter day here in Boston, and so I've got all sorts of lights on here in the little book room. But that's not, in fact, the problem in the video. That the light that you're seeing is coming directly from heaven. Okay, because Steve is always right. Okay, so just picture this light, and then add in Gregorian chants. But anyway, the reason that I put those books on the floor and piled them up like that is because I thought in the back of my mind, I will leave those there, and I will sort them and inventory them and deal with them once I need that space for the next massive used book haul that I get in Vermont. I had no idea at the time, nor did any of us, that would be put on hold indefinitely. That trips like that would be impossible. That not only would the travel be ill-advised, but that the shops themselves would be closed. And when that reality started hitting home for me, when I started realizing a few weeks ago that all the used bookstores that I go to are closed, and closed for the duration, no one knows when they'll be open again, if ever, I started looking at that pile on the floor a little differently. I started going back to it and picking things off it to read. I don't know when the next time is that I will get a secondhand book. I have no idea. I have no idea when the next time is that I'll have the pleasure of hunting for secondhand books with Mark. So I have been going at that pile sort of ritualistically, thinking, who knows if these might be the last used books that I get for a long, long time. And I thought that maybe I could take you through that as I read those books. And I could take you through them, and maybe we could talk about them a bit in a series that I could call Reading, not Reading, but Reading Vermont. Oh God, here we go again. Here we go again with the digging, with my little baby tunneling. Why are you tunneling? I know why you're tunneling. It's a rhetorical question. She's tunneling because she can't lay on top of me. She wants to lay next to me. And since I'm making a video, she's protesting by digging. Anyway, so I thought we'd do the first of these books, and if you like this idea, we'll just go through that whole pile book by book. I've talked about them a bit when I hauled them, but I could go into more detail as I read them, as I'm reading through that pile now as sort of a goodbye to used books. And the first one that I want to talk about is from 1974. This is John Jakes. This is The Bastard, the first book in his Kent Family Chronicles that did really well for the publisher. He got a Book of the Month Club. I believe he got a Book of the Month Club. He got a great paperback deal, which a lot of publishers in the 1970s, they looked covetously on that because paperbacks were in a boom time, and you could get a very good deal for paperbacks if your agent was good, if you were canny. And you could expect a major bump for when the book came out in paperback, because it would be, what was this? This was $1.95 instead of $5 for the hardcover. So, and they're cheap to make. Look at this. This is cheap paper. This particular mass market paperback that I got up in Vermont is in perfect condition. It looks no different than it would have if you'd bought it off a metal spinner rack at a drugstore in 1974. But this is the story of Philippe Charbonneau, who is a young cutie patootie, that's him on the cover, who is the bastard of English nobleman and has a fraught and adventurous life in England in which he becomes a printer's devil. He becomes an apprentice to a printer named Sholto. And all of that is going fairly well, but then a series of circumstances, a series of plot devices. Jakes was really good at keeping a plot boiling along. He was an old-fashioned, old-school manual typewriter hack of the first water. So he doesn't write boring prose. It's not great prose by any means. It is workmanlike, but it's still really good. When I mention his name, I sometimes recommend. He wrote a Roman historical novel, The Man from Kenai, that's really good, really really good. But he wrote a bunch of other stuff too. Oh my God, never stopped. And he hit gold with this book. It did really well. Philippe Charbonneau leaves England just in time to come to the American colonies when they are broiling over with rebellion. He, in the standard of the historical fiction of the time, he is a stand-in made-up character who is inserted into all the events of history by the author. That was the standard of the time. That's how you wrote historical fiction. And if it wasn't the standard of the time before this book showed up, it was after this book showed up for a good 20 years, where this stand-in character meets every famous person, is present at every major event, never hears anything by hearsay, is always there on the spot with the Boston Massacre or whatever it is. Philippe Charbonneau changes his name to Philip Kent and becomes that stand-in character, our sort of eyewitness, our keyhole to the whole of the formative events of the American Revolution, in this book culminating in the Battle of Lexington and Concord and Paul Revere's ride. And by the time the book is over, he has met everyone. But that starts when he's in London. He doesn't start meeting famous people when he's in America. He starts right away, because that's the formula that Kent is using here. When we're in London and he's at the shop of his master has two high-profile guests. let me read you here. This is Solomon Sholto introducing Philip Kent. I promised to introduce you to a colonial, didn't I? Well, Franklin's come by, and out of the blue, in company with another of my good friends. Quickly, we don't want to make too much time away from the press. Philippe followed the printer into the front shop. Two soberly dressed gentlemen were conversing with Mrs. Emma. Marie, busy dusting the bookshelves with a feather whisk, gave her son a surprised stare as he entered. Following Mr. Sholto, Philippe didn't stop for an explanation. The younger of the two visitors, a ruddy-cheeked man in his early 40s, was speaking to Sholto's wife in lilting English that Philippe later discovered was a hallmark of the man's Dublin origins. One of the only times I've ever heard anyone use the word lilting unironically in connection with anything that's made by anyone who comes from Dublin. Lilting is not the first. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but lilting is not the first word that will come to your mind. And we're interrupting. This is Edmund Burke, of course, and we're interrupting him in mid-conversation. We've missed your good husband's occasional presence at the Turk's Head. The Whig party is coming back to life over the coffee cups. The man turned to acknowledge the printer's arrival. Even irascible Johnson, who thinks the first Whig was the devil himself, has inquired after you, Solomon. Illness and work have kept me away, Sholto said. When health prevails and profits are secure, then there's time for idling with friends. But it was the other visitor at whom Philippe stared in awe. The, quote, godless wizard, the internationally hailed genius, the lusty Thames swimmer. Dr. Benjamin Franklin was a stout man, almost 20 years older than his companion. He had jowls, receding gray hair, a paunch, and keen eyes. Spectacles enhanced his sagacious expression. At once, Philippe noticed a peculiarity about the lenses. The lower halves seemed to be of a different thickness than the upper. Could the spectacles be the invention of which Sholto had referred? Franklin said, I did warn you about the prose. Franklin said to the printer, I agree about work, Solomon. Hundreds and hundreds of times have I agreed. Poor Richard said in the same thing endlessly, whenever, in fact, I ran out of witty words for him. I long ago concluded that I have written overmuch concerning the virtues of thrift and labor. I'm supposed to be the very model of a dull, parsimonious drudge, and gad, how the reputation lingers. Let me so much as crack one jest among the Britons, and eyebrows fly to heaven. But you know, my friend, I enjoy the presence of maidens and Madeira as well as the next. And it goes on from there. Philippe Charbonneau goes to America, changes his name, seeks his new fortune, attempts to establish a family. At the very end of the book, he says, I have a feeling the Kent family will do quite well. As he's marching back from Lexington and Concord, in which he took a pivotal role. And it's a bit funny. This gimmick is a bit funny. And to have an anonymous, made-up person suddenly be at key events everywhere. It was done around the same time in the luxurious 70s. It was done with the French Revolution. It was done with the American Revolution. It was done all over the place. I'm not saying that it's a bad gimmick. You have to have a gimmick. Somehow you have to have a gimmick when you're writing historical fiction or you're just writing history. But it shows how biddable the market is that this book spawned a wave of imitators. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to dramatize some key event of the past or some key era in history through the eyes of a omnipresent mannequin. And yet, that didn't stay the fashion. That didn't stay true. Because the market is very biddable. It follows the latest fad. And the latest fad is to do just the opposite of this, right? The latest fad, we saw it with, the book that started it all was The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory. And that new fad has reached its apotheosis with Hilary Mantel's Oliver Cromwell novels. And the new fad is no invented characters, or maybe invented secondary characters, but the main character will be someone from history, reinterpreted, revivified with modern sensibilities. Okay, so we will see in the upcoming 10 years a slew of Wolf Hall imitators, a slew of books that do that sort of thing with their main character, whoever that main character is. And then, who knows, in 15 or 20 years, someone might write a different kind of book, maybe back to this, or maybe a new template completely, and revamp the industry again. All of a sudden, there'll be a million imitations of that book. But in the meantime, I reread this off my reading Vermont pile, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. I was brought back immediately to when I first read this. I was one of the comparatively few Americans who read this when it first came out, and then John Jakes got, like I mentioned, he got a good paperback deal off this book. This was the first printing, and then and then there was a miniseries of The Bastard. It was a huge ratings hit, an enormous ratings hit. All of a sudden, it was all anybody could talk about. There was no social media at the time. Those of you who are young will be horrified. There was no internet, but it was all anybody could talk about. And this book, The Bastard, was reprinted. And instead of that fairly anodyne picture of Philip Kent, instead, the main character from the miniseries was printed. The cover was just redone with his face on it. And, oh my God. Every workaday mechanical typewriter hack in the world hopes and dreams for something like that to happen. What happened to John Jakes? All of a sudden, he was the author of The Goose That Laid the Golden Egg. All of a sudden, a book that for him was years and years old. Long since the first drafts, long since the reading copies, long since the hardcover, long since the paperback. All of a sudden, a new printing of the paperback was bringing him in a massive amount of money. And ending up everywhere. Barbershops, summer homes, everywhere. That if you have seen this mass market paperback of The Bastard, you have almost certainly seen it in the next printing, which has the TV cover. And I say good for him. There's nothing wrong or deleterious about this novel, or as much as I can remember about any of the others. That I had, when I finished my reread of this, I had a brief urge to read the rest of the Kent Family Chronicles, but I think I can probably suppress that urge, and I think I should. This is the phenomenon, not the rest of it. So I may I may suppress that urge. I don't think I'll ever encounter them again. But if I did, for instance, I found the box set, there was a nice big wide box set of like, I think 5 Kent Family Chronicle mass market paperbacks. If I found such a thing like that, I would probably buy it, and I would probably reread those volumes just because I love old box sets like that. I wish I still had all the old box sets I used to have. And who knows? The time may come when I will be hunting for books again up in Vermont with Mark Richardson, and I will find those books. If so, well, I'll make another reading Vermont pile, and we'll go through that. But in the meantime, we've got 50 books to do, 40 or 50 books to go through book by book. So I'm not saying to do this every day. I don't want to bore you more than I usually do. But if you're interested in this, I'd be happy to go through what could be my last used book haul in quite some time. My last massive one. So let me know, and I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.